Good afternoon and welcome to the Toronto Reference Library. We are pleased to welcome you to the first of our Baycrest Partnership Health Talk for 2014. Today's topics is memory and aging, how our brains support memory, different types of memory, and how they change with age and the factors that affect its function. Dr. Susan Vandermorris is the speaker today, and she is a psychologist in neuropsychology and cognitive health program at Baycrest. She completed her postdoctoral work in cognitive neuroscience at the Rotman Research Institute and the University of Toronto. Her clinical work involves assessment of different cognitive disorders and the delivery of memory intervention programs for healthy older adults. Today's session will be videotaped and later available on our YouTube channel. Now, please join me in welcoming Dr. Vandermorris. Susan, please.
I'll talk today about memory and aging. And as Antoaneta mentioned, my work at Baycrest is organized around assessment and education and empowerment of older adults who have concerns or changes in their cognitive abilities. And one of the ways in which I do that is I run educational programming at Baycrest on the topic of memory and aging. And it's based on this work that I'm coming to present to you today. I'm going to give you a little bit of a snippet of what we teach in our course. I want to acknowledge first my supervisor and a mentor of mine at Baycrest and the creator of the Memory and Aging program at Baycrest. That's Dr. Angela Troyer. She's the practice chief of psychology and the director of the division I work in and an assistant professor at University of Toronto. She put together a Memory and Aging course at Baycrest in 1997 that has evolved and grown with the population and has been attended by over 950 participants to date. And we've really learned a lot from the participants who've come through and worked together to best meet the educational needs of people who are experiencing changes in memory and to devise strategies to help based on research literature. Here's what I'm going to talk to you about today. I'm going to talk first about memory in the brain. I'll go on to tell you a bit about a few different types of memory and how they change with normal aging. We'll talk briefly about different factors that affect memory, different individual factors that may be true for some of us, but not all of us, things we can all do to control our experience of memory change. Then I'll go through some examples of what's considered a normal memory change and what's a type of memory change that might warrant the attention of a doctor. Okay? We'll have lots of time for discussion, so as Antoaneta mentioned, I'm going to ask you to hold questions until the end, and then we'll use the microphone to have some question and answer period. Okay? That's my favorite part of these kinds of talks, so I'll try to get there as soon as we can. Okay. So first we'll talk briefly about the brain. When we learn and remember information, we use our brain. Okay? This is a diagram of the brain. It's one of my favorites because it still has the eyeballs attached, if you see up here on the one side. Okay? So we're looking at the brain this way, right? And I'm just going to point out a few key areas of the brain. The frontal lobes up here and the temporal lobes here, and one structure within the temporal lobe called the hippocampus. These are the areas of the brain that are most intimately involved in supporting learning and remembering new information, okay? Unfortunately, they're also the areas of the brain that are most sensitive to normal aging. So as we get older, these areas of the brain shrink a little bit and lose a little bit of functionality. So we can look around the room and see that it's, it's okay. It seems to be normal for our hair to change color as we get older, right? It seems to be normal for us to be more likely to need glasses as we get older. And just like those changes happen normally as we get older, some changes happen in the brain. Okay. The brain is made up of billions of brain cells, and each cell has a cell body, an axon that connects sort of cell to cell, and dendrites, which are the little branches that offer more interconnectivity cell to cell. And our brain communicates within itself by sending chemical and electrical messages across these distributed networks. And again, similarly, with normal aging, there are some changes that happen at the cellular level. So we lose some brain cells. And the networks that connect area to area become a little less dense, okay? So this helps to explain why it may take a little bit longer to make sense of information, or a little bit longer to come up with that word that's stuck on the tip of your tongue. It may have to do with that reduced connectivity that happens as we normally age. That's about all I'm going to say about the brain for now. I'm going to tell you a story now about how memory works, or how we think about memory. And in a few moments, I'm going to go into some details about different types of memory. But before I do that, I want to tell you about 3 memory processes. So when we learn and remember information, 3 different things have to happen for it to go well. The first thing that has to happen is we have to take the information in. We have to encode the information or learn the information, right? We have to pay attention to what the person is saying to us. We have to hear the information, and we have to take it into our brains. Okay, it's step 1. The second thing is we have to store that information somewhere. We have to sort of file it away in our mental filing cabinet. Okay, that's storage. The third thing, and you know, where it all comes together or falls apart is we have to be able to retrieve the information, right? We need to be able to pull it out when we want it, all right? So if we make a mistake with our memory, that mistake can really be triggered at any one of these 3 stages. But if there's a break at any one of the 3, we've got no chance at the end, right? So encoding failures are failures of often failures of attention, right? It's impossible to learn something you don't hear. It's impossible to learn something you don't see. It's impossible to learn something you don't pay attention to, with some very rare exceptions. So if you're, say, watching a news program on TV and someone in your home says to you, oh, hey, I really need you to pick up the groceries tomorrow. But, you know, the story is about Justin Bieber, and he's been up to a lot of hijinks lately, and you're very, very interested in it. You may not hear your family member saying to you, oh, please pick up the groceries, right? You may not encode that instruction, and therefore you're not going to act on it. So that's a failure of memory that happens right at the beginning when you're trying to learn the new information. Storage failures are less frequent. They're harder to come up with examples of. But I'm certain of the fact that in grade 11 geography class, I learned all of the countries in Europe and all of the capital cities, and each and every one. And I'm sure I could put them on a map and I could write down the names. I'm sure that if you put a blank map of Europe in front of me now, I couldn't do that. I could get a lot of them, but not all of them, right? And I don't think that information is there anymore. I think it's gone. Who knows? I think I would have to relearn it if I were to try to do that again. Retrieval failures are quite common. So a good example of a retrieval failure is you're at the grocery store. You bump into your old neighbor. You haven't seen him in a number of years. You recognize him. You know his name, right? But there he is, and you're scrambling. You cannot think of the name on the spot, right? And you say, "Hi, it's nice to see you. How are you? How are things?" You may blush a little. You may get frustrated with yourself. You may get quite anxious with yourself. And then you walk away, and he walks away, and lo and behold, John pops into mind, right? So that's a failure of retrieval. And you know it's a retrieval problem because you later remember it. So you know it was stored in there, all right? You knew it was in there, but you just couldn't pull it out at the moment where you wanted to. Okay. So I'll tell you that the research tells us that normal aging affects these 3 different processes differently. In some cases, there's a big effect of normal aging on the process, and in other cases, there's not so much of an effect. where do you think the biggest effect of normal aging is? Do you think it's on encoding, on storage, or on retrieval? Let's just see a show of hands. Who think it's on encoding? That's where the problem is. That's what I've noticed changing as I've gotten older. Nobody. Who thinks it's on storage? One person, two, three, good. Who thinks it's on retrieval? An overwhelming majority think it's on retrieval. Well, you are a very sophisticated audience, or another way to say that is your experience is very congruent with what the research literature shows us. As we age, it's this retrieval process that gets more difficult. So I've heard the analogy of it's like books in the shelf on a library. As we get older, we accumulate more and more books on our shelves, more and more memories in there. But it's harder to sort of go in and pick out that right book right at the right moment when we need it. We know they're in there, but it's more difficult. It may take a little more time or a little more energy to pick out just that right thing. And it's perfectly appropriate that we are in such a rich, a book-rich environment here today. So that's the story of memory processes. I'm going to spend a bit more time now telling you about different types of memory. I'm going to tell you about 5 different types of memory. And scientists break up memory into different types for a couple of reasons. One is it's a helpful way to think about how we learn and store and remember different kinds of information. And the other is there's some evidence that these different types of memory are represented differently in the brain. So different brain systems seem to support different types of memory. And for this reason, these different types of memory are affected differently by aging. So what I'm going to tell you is that some of these types of memory are significantly affected by aging, and some are not. Okay, so this is a story of strengths and weaknesses. The first type of memory I'll tell you about is semantic memory. So a definition of semantic memory is the accumulation of facts and experiences you've gained over your lifetime. So examples of this are things you know about geography, or in my case, don't know about geography, politics, current events, words you know. If I were to test your memory, and let's do that here now, I could ask you some questions, and you could shout out the answers for me, okay? So here's our first question. What's the capital of France? Just shout it out. Paris. You don't have very loud shouting voices. Okay. Paris was the answer for the record. What's the longest day of the year? June 21 or 20? This is a tougher one, right? It varies. And I forgot to look up the answer before I came here. But somewhere in June, in the 20s. Very good, thank you. And what does the word imminent mean? About to happen? What's that? You cannot prevent it. It's about to happen. Great. So again, very sophisticated audience here. All of those questions tap into your semantic memory, things you just know, okay? A unique quality of semantic memory is that for the most part, we have no idea how we acquire this information, right? I don't think, and please correct me if I'm wrong, any of you can tell me the exact moment, where they were, who they were with, what they were doing when they learned that the capital of France is Paris. Can anyone? No? You may recall a beautiful trip to Paris. You may think fondly about that time you really wanted to go to Paris but never got to. But you probably can't tell me when you learned that fact, right? And that's a quality of semantic memory. It's things you just know without any kind of contextual information as to how those pieces of information got in there. Now, what do we think? We'll do this by show of hands again. Does semantic memory change with age? Have you noticed a change in your ability to hold on to this type of information as you've gotten older? Who says, yes, it's changed? Okay. Who says it's gotten better? Who says it's gotten worse? Okay, so I saw a lot of hands for change and very few hands for better and a few more hands for worse. Who says it's about the same? Okay, again, a good portion of you think it's about the same. So what the research evidence shows us is very congruent with what your hands are telling me. If we test people on a semantic memory task that requires them to show knowledge of words, of vocabulary words, Just, do you know what this means? Do you know what that means? What we see is a pattern like this. I'm going to show you lots of graphs that look like this today. They're all going to have some summary of performance on one side and age along the bottom. And you can just imagine this is a summary of scores over a lifespan from, say, 20 to 90 plus, okay? That's the span of most of these research studies. So across the lifespan on tests of vocabulary, what you see is that most people stay about the same, or that the population is about the same in terms of what words they know. If you look at something like financial knowledge, which is another area of semantic memory, you'll see a different curve. You'll see that a lot of people get better or have more knowledge about financial matters as they get older. Can anyone shout out a reason why that might be the case? Because you have to, right? Right? It becomes more important, you get more experience with this, you acquire more skills and knowledge, okay? Now, this isn't about financial success, this is about financial knowledge, okay? So semantic memory, at worst, stays the same, but in a lot of areas actually gets better as we get older. Let's look at a different type of memory now. This is immediate memory. Immediate memory is the type of memory we use to hold a little bit of information in mind over just a few seconds, okay? So a classic example is looking up a number in the phone book and holding it in mind just long enough so that you can dial it, okay? Immediate memory is very unique because it fades very rapidly. So if you've ever looked up a number in the phone book and then had the doorbell ring, you know that there's almost zero chance that you're going to remember that phone number without looking it back up again, right? So as soon as that rehearsal, as soon as you stop repeating that information to yourself, that immediate memory fades away in just a matter of seconds. The other thing that's unique about immediate memory is it has a pretty fixed capacity, a small capacity. It can only hold a little bit of information. Okay, if we look at numbers, we see that most people can hold about 7 numbers plus or minus 2, so somewhere between 5 and 9 numbers in mind. And that's too bad that we now have to dial the extensions of our phone numbers, and they've become 10-digit numbers instead of 7, because that makes a little more challenge to our immediate memory and pushes us beyond the limits of what's normal and routine. So let's do a test of our immediate memory to give you a feel of what I'm talking about. What I'm going to do is I'm going to say some numbers to you, okay? I want you to listen carefully, and then when I finish, just repeat them out loud right back after me, okay? We'll start off gentle. 1, 6, 2, 8. Go ahead. Sounded perfect. Here we go. Let's go further. 5, 3, 7, 2, 6. You guys are amazing. 4, 9, 3, 6, 8, 1. You guys sound very good. I heard some people lumping the numbers together a little bit. So I heard 4936 in there. And that's a strategy you can use to hold more information in your immediate memory. Just for fun, let's go all out, okay? Here we go. Ready? 6, 5, 2, 3, 7, 5, 6, 7, 6, 8, 8. Go ahead. All I hear is laughter, okay? I hear laughter and some very close approximations, or possibly the exact right answer. I couldn't quite hear. So I'm sure that a few of you got that. Most of you laughed at me, and for good reason, right? I gave you a number that was, I think, 11 digits long, which is well outside the capacity of most people's immediate memory, right? So we can hold only so much, and then sort of the whole system lets us down. Oh, cheated. So what do people think? I showed you the arrow already. Does immediate memory change with age? Have you noticed a change in how much you can hold online as you've gotten older? Yes, yes. So who thinks it's gotten better? Nobody, one person. Who thinks it's stayed the same? a sizable minority. And who thinks it's gotten worse? A more sizable minority. There are lots of abstainers in this audience. I'm going to get you guys putting your hands up sooner or later. So what the research shows, again, is very much along the lines of what you're telling me. There is a change. If you look at the group level, overall, most people's scores on immediate memory measures go down a little bit as they get older. But it's a pretty trivial change. So you can see it on a graph, but most people, even at the oldest age cohort, are still comfortably within that sort of 5 to 9 items range when tested on this kind of a task. Okay? So if you haven't noticed a change, that makes sense. If you've noticed a bit of a change, that makes sense. Okay? I'll talk about a third type of memory now, and this is recent memory. Recent memory is your ability to remember information from minutes, hours, or days ago, okay? Examples of this are remembering my name, which was introduced just maybe 10 minutes ago. I see some guilty smiles. That's good. Remembering what you had for supper last night. Did anyone have anything delicious? Yes? I'll ask you afterwards because we have to use the mic. Remembering where you parked your car today if you drove, or how you got into the building today if you came on an unusual route on TTC, for example. I'm going to give you a test of recent memory to give us a feel for this and to give us a feel for how it's different than other types of memory. What I'm going to do is I'm going to read a list of words, and those of you with pens, I would ask you to put them down. Okay? I'm going to read a short list of words. I'd like you to listen carefully and try to remember them. Okay? I'll ask you to tell them back to me later, but not right away. Okay? Are we ready? Here comes the list, okay? Again, pens down. Armor, movie, lemon, castle, account. Okay. So here's a blank slide, and here's my best attempt to distract you. I'm going to tell you a little bit about the differences between recent and immediate memory. So in our immediate memory system, we can hold that much information in mind for quite a while just by rehearsing it, by saying it over and over in our minds, right? I want you to stop doing that now by paying good attention to me and what I'm saying, okay? And by stopping that rehearsal and by letting your immediate memory system sort of relax and get out of the picture here, I'm going to force you to use your recent memory system. And the advantages of the recent memory system is that it doesn't have such a fixed capacity. It can hold a lot more information. The other thing about recent memory is it's much more resistant to disruption or distraction. So hopefully I've got your attention, all of you, by now, and you haven't written the information down, and you're not repeating it in your head anymore, and you're letting your recent memory system do its magic. So it can sort of do its magic offline. You don't have to focus on the information to let it happen, to let it store itself and be available for retrieval later on. Okay? What do we think? Let me ask you another question. Does recent memory change with age? Hands for it gets better. Recent memory, my memory for things that happened minutes, days, hours ago, it's better now than it used to be. One person over there. Who thinks it stays about the same? A few people. And who thinks it's gotten worse? Many, many people. Okay. So what the science tells us, and I'll explain a little bit more in a few minutes, is that it does change with age, and it does get a little worse with age. But it depends on how we test it. So I'm going to test your memory for these words now in 2 different ways. First thing I'm going to do is I'm going to ask you to recall the words or retrieve the words, okay? So just shout out all together as many of those words as you can remember now. I think I heard them all in there, but I'm going to hold off on giving you the answers for just a few seconds. I'm going to show you a second set of words now, and this set of words includes all the ones I read to you before, plus some other ones that I didn't read to you. So take a look here now and see if you can pick out the words that I read to you earlier. So here are the answers if you want to check your work. So that was 2 different ways of testing. And in the research literature, we call those, the first one, recall, your free recall or retrieval of that information. And the second one, recognition. Can you pick out the information from other distracting information? And the age effect on recent memory depends on which way we test the memory. So who found it easier to recall than to recognize the words? Who thought the first one was easier to just pull them out of mind than it was to pick them off a list? A few people. And who thought it was easier to pick them off a list, to recognize the words? More people, many more people. Okay, and that's what the science, that's the story the science tells. That if we bring people in the laboratory and run them through a test, much like the one I just ran with you, you will see a pretty significant age-related decline in the amount of information we can spontaneously pull out of our memory. Now, I gave you a 5-item word list. In some of the science labs, they go to much greater lengths to demonstrate this effect. Clinically, it's pretty customary to use between 10 and 15 words to check this out. But in some of the labs I was a part of as a postdoc, we would go up to 80 words. Teach you the words, maybe show them to you twice to be kind, and then ask for the information back. But anyway, regardless of the length of the items at the list, what we see across most of these studies is as we get older, we have a harder time pulling this information out of mind. Okay. If we look at it the other way, though, if we give you things from the list and things not from the list, even if we go up to that 80-word mark, we see a much smaller effect of age. Okay, so as we get older, we are still well able to pick out the things we have learned before from a list, from distractor items. So as a footnote, I should tell you that this first curve that seems to show a downward story, that downward trajectory starts at about age 20, okay, and is relatively steady from that point on. So I see some people out in the corners of the audience sort of resting comfortably. They shouldn't be. These changes start at age 20. Another thing that this data illustrates quite well is the difficulty with retrieval that happens as we get older. So successfully recognizing words you've learned before means that you have encoded those words and you have stored those words in your memory, right? And if you can recognize them, you can prove that they were stored in your memory, right? But if you have to recall them, retrieve them without any cues or without any supports, that shows, and have difficulty there, that shows that illustrates the difficulty with retrieval. And the example of bumping into someone at the grocery store and not being able to pull back their name right away also illustrates that difficulty with retrieval in the recent memory system. Okay. I'll tell you about a 4th type of memory, and this is remote memory. Remote memory is a type of memory for things that happened to you many, many years ago, okay? And this can be personal things like how you celebrated your 19th birthday, or it can be public things like news events, like JFK assassination, for example. If I were to test your memory, I could ask you questions like, what were the names of your elementary school teachers? I see some sweat on some brows, and I see some smiles, right? Most of us can recall a favorite one or two, or maybe a least favorite one or two, but that's a tough test. I could also ask you how you celebrated your 30th birthday, for those of us who are outside of our 30s. And I'd like anyone who has a good 30th birthday story to approach me afterwards and tell it to me, because I've used that example a lot. But a lot of people say, oh, my 30th birthday, and they don't want to talk about it. And I would include myself in that crowd now that I've crossed that mark. But I would love to hear a positive 30th birthday story. So if you have one, please come and tell it to me. So what do you think? What's your experience? Does remote memory change with age? Your memory for things that happened a long time ago. Have you noticed changes as you've gotten older in your ability to recall this type of information? Who thinks it's gotten better? A few people. Who thinks it's stayed about the same? A larger few. And who thinks it's gotten worse? Probably tied with the same people. And that's really interesting. The research in this area is really tricky to do, okay? So it's very easy for me to give you a list of words to remember now and test you for that list an hour from now, a week from now, a month from now. It's not easy for me to read you a list of words on your 20th birthday and then test you for that memory now, right? We all have our own lives, we all have our own experiences, and we all remember that information in different ways. The best way that scientists have come up with to assess this type of memory is by asking people to tell stories from specific life periods in their life. So I may say, tell me about an event that happened to you during your childhood years. And get just your recollections and ask you for as much detail as you can. And when you're done, go line by line and say, any more details about this, any more details about this, any more details about this. And then what we can do is we can look at those details that people are able to recall and get a sense of whether those details represent real mental time travel and real re-experiencing of the event. Is there a sense of space? Is there a sense of the time? Is there who was there, what they were wearing, what was the weather like, that kind of thing. Versus another type of detail, which is contextual information, which was kind of, I was living in Montreal at the time. It was probably winter. These were the things going. I just had my third child. Blah blah blah. This kind of contextual information that makes the story make sense, frankly. And what we see if we bring younger and older adults into the laboratory and do this kind of testing is this kind of pattern, where that nitty-gritty detail of exactly where you were and what was happening, your ability to recall that kind of detail does decline as we get older. Whereas your ability to contextualize the information and make sense of it and put it together into a coherent narrative increases. So what the sense we make of that is our remote memory changes as we get older. It becomes sort of more schematic or more gist-like and less specific and less detailed. And that could be a function of, the sort of volume of memories that we acquire as we go on, or our increased ability to make sense of the world around us as we get older. The last type of memory I'll talk to you about is prospective memory or prospective memory. This is the ability to remember to do something in the future. So your memory for the future. I'm going to twist your minds a little bit now. So examples of this are remembering to pick up the milk on the way home today, remembering you have a dentist appointment tomorrow at 2 o'clock. Okay. I'm going to give you a test of prospective memory. When I show you a slide with a star on it later this morning or this afternoon, I want you to think of a very, very hard question to ask me during the question period, okay? And I want you to put your hand on your head when you've thought of that question, okay? So what do we think? Are there age-related changes in prospective memory? Your memory for your to-dos. What have you noticed? Who thinks their memory for that kind of thing has gotten better? Couple people. Who thinks it's stayed about the same? Couple more people. And who thinks it's gotten worse? A lot of people. Okay. All right. So the story from the research that we get around prospective memory is kind of interesting. It's a yes and no answer. Okay. One of the first studies on prospective memory went sort of like this. The researchers brought people into the lab and said, okay, what I would like you to do for this experiment is call me at 3 o'clock on Friday. That's it. Have a nice day. Off you go. And they did this with a group of younger adults and a group of older adults. And younger adults in these studies are usually in their 20s. They're usually university students, very bright, very organized, on top of their stuff, of course. And older adults are usually volunteers in the 60 to 80 range, okay? Which group do you think did better? Who thinks the younger did better? A couple. And who thinks the older group did better? A lot more people. So you are right. The older group did better on this task. They were much more likely to make that call successfully. Any thoughts on why this might be the case? The young people might be so busy doing other things. It's possible they might have more going on. What else could it be? The older people probably wrote it down. And that is exactly what they found. The older group was more conscientious in writing it down, or just simply using strategies to ensure they did the thing they said they would do. Okay? A short pencil is better than a long memory. I really like that expression, and I will use it with your permission if that's okay. That's great. And a short pencil is better than a long memory. You know, our memory strategy teaching that we do at Baycrest has a lot to do with these simple things that we can do to learn and remember information better. And writing things down is a very valid strategy. It's not the only one. There are others out there and things that you can do in your mind as well. But I love that. So as more and more studies have gone on, what they've shown pretty reliably across study is that there is an effect of age on prospective memory if the task is set up such that there's no cue to do the thing you're supposed to do. So an example of this would be if I ask you to put a cake in the oven and I told you you can't set a timer, but you need to take it out in an hour. You can't do anything. You can't write it down. I'm going to tie your hands, and you have to just remember to take it out in an hour. Meantime, go about your business, okay? As we get older, we're more likely to make a mistake in terms of remembering to take that cake out right at the right time we want to. Whereas if the study is set up so that you're allowed to use cues, and it could be very simple things, like just the timer for the cake, for example, there's virtually no effective age, okay? And if you think about it, I like the cake timer as an example because a cake timer doesn't tell you, oh, it has been 60 minutes and it is time to now remove the cake from the oven so that it may cool and that you don't burn the cake or burn the house down. The cake timer just says ding, right? And it's just a cue, it's just a hint that gets your memory system triggered and helps you grab that, oh, what I need to do now is take out the cake. It's very simple and very effective. I see that a lot of you are going to ask me very hard questions later on, and I'm very excited about that. Terrific. Okay, so I've taught you about lots of different types of memory, and my take-home message about, the reason I tell you about all those different types of memory is to help us to think a little differently about memory changes with aging, to help us appreciate where our strengths are, what does change and what doesn't change, and what little ideas or strategies we can use to capitalize on our strengths to compensate for our weaknesses. Okay? I'm going to tell you now very briefly about different factors that can affect memory. And these are true across the lifespan, but we get a lot more attention paid to them as we get older. I've put up a list here of different things that science has told us that can affect memory. It could be a much longer list, but here's some things I'll just tell you briefly about today. Of course, there are medical disorders and diseases that can affect memory, and I'll spend a few moments coming up talking a bit about dementia, which is a syndrome that certainly affects memory, but there are other medical disorders and diseases that have more subtle effects on memory. Things like stroke can affect memory, diabetes can have some subtle effects on memory, heart conditions can have some subtle effects on memory. My point in raising this is just to get you thinking about what your own personal experience and whether any of these things might be contributing to your experience of memory change if you're experiencing memory change. Certain medications can affect memory, and I won't go into any detail about that now, but if you are taking a medication and you have concerns that it is affecting your memory, it's always a good idea to talk to your doctor about that. In some cases, there may be alternatives or different strategies or different medications that you can use to successfully treat whatever condition the medication is for. The remaining factors on this list are things you can control and things you can take action on today. Okay? Diet is a major factor that influences memory. And I won't tell you today about any magic food or any magic supplement that is the answer to memory change. I will tell you the very unexciting but true news that a healthy, balanced diet is the best thing you can do to support your memory. There's a bit of evidence that says the Mediterranean-style diet may be a good version of a healthy diet to use to support your memory. But but just following the food guide recommendations, limiting the things that we know are bad for us, and making sure we eat our fruits and veggies is the best advice I can give you around eating well to support memory. Exercise, physical exercise, is a growing area of study in terms of the benefits of physical exercise on brain health. And there's more and more evidence that exercise is really a very powerful intervention to maximize your overall health as well as your brain health. We know that exercise is good for the heart, of course, reducing risk of cardiac events and stroke. It also seems to be good for mood disorders such as depression or just overall feelings of wellness. And there's growing evidence that it's important that can offer benefits to memory as well. So if you took the subway here, I encourage you to walk one extra stop before getting on the subway on the way home. The next time you park your car, you can park it at the far back corner of the parking lot, or take a look at what you're doing in terms of your usual exercise routine. Talk to your doctor about it and think about ways you might want to add a little or improve a little on this, because there's real bang for the buck there. Thinking activities are something that get a lot of attention in the press, and we lump this in the research under a term called cognitive engagement, which means doing things that are interesting, challenging, novel, that get you thinking. So crosswords and Sudoku get a lot of attention in the newspaper. What the research shows around thinking activities is that no one thing has really emerged as the thing you need to do. So if you hate doing crosswords, you don't have to do crosswords anymore, okay? The best evidence shows that doing things that you like, that are enjoyable, and that are challenging are important. And doing a variety of things is important. So coming to classes at the library is a great example, hopefully, if you enjoyed it today, of something you can do to get yourself thinking, to get yourself socially interacting, and challenging your brain in that way, and maximizing your brain health in that way. Attitude is important. I'll tell you a little vignette, which is that some researchers put together an intervention, a program for older adults who are concerned about the memory. And they didn't teach about memory change. They didn't teach about memory strategies. All they did was help people develop more positive attitudes about their memory, get the sort of message across that you can do it. When faced with memory challenges, you can succeed, okay? So the whole intervention was focused around changing attitudes. And the outcomes of that intervention were very similar to the outcomes we see in our memory and aging program, where we do teach about memory changes in aging. We do teach about memory strategies you can use to succeed in memory situations. Which is to say that if you're faced with a difficult situation, your approach to that situation makes a huge difference, and in some cases makes as much difference as anything else. So it's not to say that memory change is all in your head, but it is a good case for having a positive attitude around memory challenges when you're in a situation where you have some concerns. Related to this, stress and relaxation is a huge factor that can affect memory. When we are stressed, our memory systems shut down. They don't do their job. When we're in the grocery store and trying to remember that person's name and we're panicking about it and we're just spinning ourselves out of control, we have very, very little chance of succeeding in that situation. But if you can take a deep breath, find some humor in the situation, find some way to relax, your odds of remembering are much higher. And if you can lead a lifestyle in general where you're using good strategies to manage your stress, you're going to be much better off overall. Now, if anyone has the answer for how to eliminate stress entirely, I would also like to see you after class. Okay. So that's a very quick pass over lots of different pieces of information. The last thing I'll do today is spend just a little bit more time talking about dementia and memory changes that are not normal. Okay? So dementia is a term to describe a cluster of symptoms that include deterioration in cognition or memory or other aspects of thinking and the ability to care for oneself. Okay? So dementia is diagnosed when memory changes are so severe that the person is no longer able to care for themselves. Okay? And dementia is an umbrella term. It just describes those symptoms. Okay? Dementia can be caused by a number of different diseases. The most common cause of dementia is Alzheimer's disease. So sometimes people use those terms interchangeably. But Alzheimer's disease is a progressive disease that causes symptoms of dementia, that causes memory change to the point where a person can no longer care for themselves. There are other causes of dementia. You may hear terms in the newspaper such as vascular dementia or frontal temporal dementia, dementia with Lewy bodies. These are less common causes, but they are examples of other things that can cause dementia. In Alzheimer's disease, a real hallmark symptom is a serious change to that recent memory system. So people who have Alzheimer's disease have a very hard time learning and remembering new information and holding that information over periods of even minutes, but certainly hours and days, okay? So I showed you a graph earlier that said in normal aging, there are changes to recent memory, and it's one of the biggest changes in normal aging. So this is kind of the blue graph here. As we get older, we have a harder time remembering that type of information. In Alzheimer's disease, that change is much more significant. So it's a much more steep decline, okay? And doctors can take a look at the degree of memory change and help people understand if what you're going through is normal or is it something that may signify a more serious condition like Alzheimer's disease. So I'll give you some examples now just to make it more concrete. What's an example of something that would typically happen with aging, and what's an example of something that would suggest a doctor's attention is warranted? So it's certainly normal to forget the name of someone you only see now and again, and my grocery store example is an example of that. It's not normal to forget the name of a close family member, someone you see every day. Certainly normal to forget to buy something when you go to the store, forgetting the turkey when you go do your Thanksgiving shopping is in that category of something that can certainly happen to a normal person. It's not normal to forget that you've been to the store, to find yourself in the store multiple times on the same day, to keep buying the same item even though you already had it, that kind of thing. Okay, I'm giving you pretty extreme examples here just to make the points clear. If you have questions about what's in between, I'm open to taking them here today. But what I will probably say is it's a good idea to talk to your doctor if you have concerns about those kinds of in-between examples. It's certainly normal to repeat a comment or a question a few hours later, tell someone the same story a couple of times, tell one of your kids the same story twice and the other kid never mention it, particularly as the number of kids grows. It's not normal to repeat a comment or a question a few seconds later, and particularly if you were paying good attention at the time that it happened. Okay, so those are just a few examples. That brings us to the end of what I have prepared to talk about today. So I would love to hear from the audience any questions you might have. I just ask that people go to that microphone at the back so that everyone can hear. Thank you very much for your attention. Hi.
Hi there. Great presentation. That was really interesting.
Thank you.
My question is, I find recently, to put myself on the timeline, I'm just about to turn 47. Mm-hmm. And I find that I can read a book, be very engaged with the book, enjoy the book, enjoy the characters, enjoy the story, put it down. A couple of weeks or a month later, can recount nothing but the most basic elements of the plot line. Mm-hmm. So why is that? It didn't used to be that way. Mm-hmm. Are the contents of the book not going into the right one of those 5 memory models, or what's going on there?
That's a great question. I think a lot of things could be going on. So the question is, I used to read a book, and I feel like I used to remember every detail, but now when I put it down maybe a few weeks later, I don't seem to have the details I once did. So it could be just sort of that normal age-related changes in recent memory. Could be that your life is more interesting than it used to be, and you have other things on your mind. Could be a different approach to reading that you take now that you used to along those same lines. So it doesn't necessarily need to be something of concern unless it's your job to learn and remember information of the books you read. But it could be any number of those things. There's a I can't remember. I can't remember what. There's a great book. So Sani over there has a page that we put together of great books for people who want to learn more about this topic, and all the books on that list are in the public library system. But there's a great book that's not on that list. It's something like The Secret Life of the Middle-Aged Brain or something like that, that explains how these changes look in middle ages, and what are the strengths that we get in our middle ages, and what are some of the losses or changes. But I think it's something like that. Check that out for sure.
Just out of curiosity, in an ideal state, where does a book go? In which of those 5 memory models?
That's a good question. So the information in the book, so your experience of reading the book is probably filed in your recent memory system. The stuff you just get out of it probably gets filtered into that semantic memory system, probably becomes just information you know. But I may be oversimplifying. Thanks for the question.
How you doing, Miss? My name is Sam, right?
Hi.
I have a question. Hi. Look at memory. I'm looking at memory from 2 different perspectives, from old memories and new memories.
Mm-hmm.
Like new memories is like everyday memory, like work, interacting with people.
Mm-hmm.
And then old memories could be like sleeping or like speaking different languages, like stigmata or something like that. You know what I'm saying?
Mm-hmm. I'm not sure. So the question is, sorry.
Like there's different types of memories. There's old memories and there's new memories.
Mm-hmm.
New memories is like everyday living, like learning, teaching.
Yeah.
And old memories could be like from daydreaming or sleeping.
Sure.
And then you remember different languages or different incidents so is that part of dementia?
So there's, I think part of your question, I'm not sure I have the whole sense of the question, but there's certainly different ways in which we remember recent information from past information, and that sort of connects back to what I was saying around recent and remote memory.
Yeah, because
in dementia, it's really, or in Alzheimer's disease specifically, it's really that learning and remembering new information that's most affected and most affected first.
Yeah.
Whereas people with Alzheimer's disease can often in the early stages have a lot of information available to them about things that happened a long time ago. That may change over time, but that's something that people often describe.
also chemicals can also trigger dementia, right? Chemicals?
Chemicals?
Yeah, people who lived like World War II and stuff.
People who have worked with chemicals. So dementia.
No, people who lived during World War II, they experience a lot more Alzheimer's issues, right?
Sure.
I mean,
Yeah, I
dementia
don't
is-
think I know the answer to that question.
Oh, okay.
But I could.
Yeah, because if you're exposed to more chemicals, most likely you'll experience more dementia, right?
It's possible. I don't know the answer to that question, but it's possible.
All right. Recent memory and older memory. What did you call that again?
I called it remote.
Remote.
That's
see?
okay.
All right. Okay. I forgot. Do they reside actually in different parts of the brain, or?
So there's debate around that, around where these things are located in the brain and how they're represented in the brain. And really the answer is we don't know. Some people would say yes, and some people would say no. Some people would say even if they reside in different parts of the brain, you need to use that hippocampus that I was talking about earlier to pull them back out successfully. So even if they are in different places, this hippocampus is the magic thing that lets us pull it back out and re-experience it. But it's probably not that simple, and our understanding of how the brain works is not where it could be, or not yet at the level at which we can sort of open up the brain and pull out this part or that part and make good sense of it.
Yeah. The reason I was asking that was that surely the boundary between long-term memory and short-term memory must be sliding a bit, right?
Right.
At a certain point, something that's in your short-term memory must go into the
Go into
long-term memory,
Sure,
right?
sure.
It kind of suggests that there might be strategies for increasing the use of the long-term memory
Absolutely.
for what would normally be short-term memory things.
Absolutely. That's a great question. So part of your question, I think, highlights the fact that, these breaking things up in the way I did is probably oversimplifying the way that we richly re-experience our memories in day-to-day life. But it's a useful way to study the information. But what your point around strategies is fantastic. So you mentioned that there are things that stay the same and things that change. So one example of a strategy that follows that logic that you're laying out is making associations. So I'm going to learn a new name. What's your name, if you don't mind sharing? Your first
Greg.
Greg? Greg. Nice to meet you, Greg. Okay, so Greg immediately brings to mind a boy I had a crush on in seventh grade, right? He was very cute. And my friend Jen...
You generally like Greg's or?
I'm not going to answer that question. But I'm thinking about this Greg, and he was very handsome, and my friend Jen dated him, and I did not, and it did not work out well for me. But so what I'm doing now is I'm tying the new information, which is your name, to items in my semantic memory. This stuff that happened to me a long time ago, these things I just know. I just know about this Greg from my childhood. And by doing so, I'm much more likely to remember your name when I bump into you later on. I'll say, that twinkle in his eye, it kind of reminds me of a Greg I used to know. And I've connected that information to something that's very stable in my mind, that's not going anywhere.
Okay.
Thank you.
All right, thank you.
About 2 years ago, I banged my head, maybe concussion.
I'm very sorry.
I didn't get any treatment or anything for that, didn't go to the doctor either. There was the time to make the income tax, and then it happened that I noticed. I was writing things, look back, and I left letters out. And that continued on. I had to be very careful to correct everything. I wrote letters or numbers missing. Why is that?
The short answer is I don't know. But it's certainly something to talk to your doctor about. It's possible that, when we hit our heads, things can happen to our brains. And if we hit our heads hard enough, people who have traumatic brain injuries often have symptoms of inattention, have a harder time executing those kinds of tasks along the lines of what you're describing. So it could be that, but I don't know. I would want you to talk to your doctor, or I could help you find someone who could get into more detail with you on that. Related to your question, though, there's more and more research looking at professional athletes who
I
have
noticed that.
lots and lots of concussions over time, and it's certainly the case that research is showing that lots of concussions is bad for the brain and can lead to serious consequences down the road.
The only thing to avoid it more is to sleep well.
Sleep, yes.
Many hours.
Sleep many hours. I would love to.
Thank you.
Fantastic. Thank you. So sleep is something that was not on my list of factors. That is a very important factor for memory. Absolutely. Sleep well. Sleep lots.
Well, you took the fire out of the oven there with the answer is already given me here.
Okay.
But remembering names has always been my biggest fear if it's memory loss. And it was about 35 years ago that I bought a book on improving the memory. And I used to tell people, well, I bought this book on improving my memory, but I forgot where I put it. In any event, what you said, linking events, names, things that you want to remember with strange things that don't seem to go along with a particular item, but they have a connection, and one thing leads to another. You can remember a whole page or a whole chapter of what you've read, and so that was one thing I was going to say. But let's see, writing. I find, and I don't know if this happens with other people, but when I engage the vocabulary part of my person, I increase, just very remarkably, the capacity to think and reason clearly. I think I'm engaging my imagination, even if I'm writing a biography, and as I go along, I pieces come in and that I didn't even realize were there. And I don't know whether I'm making these details up. Could you tell me whether I'm making them up or whether they're actually coming back to me?
I can't tell you whether you're making details up. I can tell you in general, all humans have an incredible capacity to misremember information and think they are right about it.
Okay.
If you look at the research on eyewitness testimony, you start to question why we even use it in the court system, because if three different people see the same thing, you will very certainly get three different stories about what happened.
Well, I'll just make it a good story then.
I think that's the way to go. I think your point around writing, too, is something we talk a lot about in our course. The act of writing something down dramatically increases your likelihood of retrieving or remembering that information later, even if you burn your note immediately after writing it. So if you ever made your grocery list and then forgotten your grocery list and gone to the store and said, ugh, you're much more likely to get the items on the list just by virtue of the fact that you made the list in the first place. You don't.
Yeah, I've seen the movies
you
too,
need it.
how they write something down, they quickly destroy it. And then,
Yeah, it's
after
in
they
there.
read it.
Yeah. Great. Thank you.
Okay, thanks.
I've seen several TV programs which feature people with amazing memories, and if you pull a day and a month and a year out of the air, they can remember exactly what they were doing on that day, the weather, and all the news-related incidents that happened. How do you explain that?
So it's a great question. There are people with what's people call it different things in the research litter, but exceptional remote memory or exceptional autobiographical memory. They can, as you mentioned, they can literally tell you what they had for breakfast on March 13th, 1954. Unbelievable feats of human achievement. And scientists don't have the answer for exactly why that is, but most people think it just has to do with the spectrum of normal human abilities, right? We have these athletes who can run this fast, and that's so much faster than the rest of us run. And sort of a similar idea, these people can remember so much detail, and that's so much more detail than the rest of us can remember. But maybe they're just, the top end of what's normal in the human population. Another fact that comes out of that research is that most of those people are pretty miserable human beings. And I often think about that when I'm working with people with experiencing memory change. If you think about what it would be like to have a perfect memory for everything that ever happened to you, and every slight, and every insult, and every conflict, it's no wonder that you would kind of carry with you a lot of baggage that might be better forgotten. Thank you for your comment.
I was wanting to know, like, my father had Alzheimer's, but my mother didn't, or she doesn't. And so I was told that there's a certain age where you would know that an older person will not be getting Alzheimer's or dementia. Is that true? Or like if you pass like 85 or 90, I don't know, is there an age where you won't develop it?
The short answer to that is no. I don't think that's what the research literature shows. The prevalence of Alzheimer's disease and dementia does grow as we get older. So a larger portion of the population has dementia or Alzheimer's disease as we get older. It's about 10% overall in the over 65 population, and in the over 85 population, it's about 35%. So I don't think that's accurate in terms of that information. Family history is a risk factor for Alzheimer's disease, but it's certainly not a one-to-one. So having a parent or a relative who had Alzheimer's disease does not necessarily mean you will get it. Does that answer?
So there's a risk factor then, like a percentage, or?
It's a risk factor. I couldn't quantify it for you off the top of your head, but it's certainly not a guarantee. It's just something that increases the risk a little bit.
All right, thanks.
First of all, thank you very much for a most interesting lecture with slides that helps just talking. Then you have both sides of the brain that are engaged.
Thank you.
Or more engaged. Now that you've done so much research at Baycrest, would there be a course for us that are here to take to maybe improve our memory? Because Sudokus are not my thing.
Sudoku's not your thing, right?
Crossword puzzles.
Fantastic. So we do run a version of what I'm talking about here today. We run a 10-hour group program, and Sandy over at that table there does have some brochures if you're interested. There is a small fee for the program, but it's a community course where we learn more details about what I've talked to you about here, as well as you learn and practice strategies to learn and remember the things that are important to you. So there's a very practical component around learning, getting the hang of some strategies that can help with this.
Could you tell me another thing? I've learned a new language about 17 years ago, and I can still speak it, although the word vocabulary has shrunk. I would have to go back into that country to hear everybody speak it, and the words would come back. But while I'm here, my brain will tell me, don't think of that word, it's too far back in the drawer, or think of it and it'll come. How does the brain do that?
That's a great question. So second language or being bilingual or being multilingual is a really interesting task for your brain if you think about it. So if you're fluent or if you have ability in more than one language, your brain effectively has to say, okay, turn this one off and turn this one on. And that's actually hard work. There's some evidence actually that came out of Baycrest that people who are bilingual or multilingual have a reduced risk of developing dementia later in life. And if they do develop dementia, develop it an average of 4 to 5 years later than people of their same age and same background who are unilingual. And the thought behind it is that constant mental work of turning one language off and turning the other one on is basically like a workout for your brain. So it's like doing Sudoku or doing a cognitively engaging activity at all times, and that may have a protective effect on the brain. So don't stress about it. It's a good thing, is what I would say.
Hello, my name is Kashik, and your last comment inspired me to ask a question because I'm practically bilingual. English is my second language. I was educated in Poland, and I think my English is proficient because I spent like 32 years working here by the way, in forensic sciences. But recently I noticed that my brain is more comfortable with Polish language. And I look around and I'm surprised people around me don't speak Polish. And I wonder if it is with age some change that I'm more comfortable in my native language.
It's possible. It's possible that as we get older, we get more comfortable with the language we knew first. Are you speaking Polish at home? Or
yes, with friends.
Yeah, with friends. So it's also possibly just
and reading a lot also.
Yeah, so you may just be experiencing it more and more and liking it better and better, and therefore sort of being more drawn to it and using the English less and less. I don't know for sure. But certainly it's harder throughout the lifespan to speak a second language, particularly if we learn it, outside of our teenage years. That second language is always going to be a bit effortful. So as we get older and some aspects of our thinking slow down a little bit, some of the work we have to do mentally becomes a little more challenging. It makes sense that continuing to speak that second language would feel a little bit like work. But I would encourage you to continue to do so.
Anybody Polish here?
I just want to thank Dr. Vandermorris for the wonderful lecture. And I'm sure you all enjoy her interesting and informative talk as much as I did. And again, thank you for coming in this snowy day, and have a good day.